This is a presentation by Manitoba Public Insurance for Behind the Wheel training. The following presentation is about best practices in driving instruction. Delivering an effective behind the wheel lesson is no accident. There are many ways people choose to deliver behind the wheel lessons, some more effective than others. A few people believe that if you drive yourself, you can teach others to drive. Although being able to drive is a prerequisite to understanding how to teach it, it does not immediately mean someone has the ability to teach others how to drive. This presentation will lay out some of the special skills, abilities, and requirements you will need to become an effective instructor. At the conclusion of this module, you should know the key elements of an effective behind-the-wheel lesson and be able to apply them. You should know the essential elements of a lesson plan, including how to set objectives. You should know how to build an effective drive route and be able to explain the proper coaching and instruction sequence of a lesson. Lastly, you should know and be able to list the criteria used to evaluate drivers during a lesson. Behind the wheel instruction should be purposeful and objective driven. This statement identifies the heart and soul of what is best practice in behind the wheel instruction and training. Simply driving in vehicles with novice drivers will not produce the kind of driver we all desire to see on our roads. When we work together with a novice driver, we need to ensure that our sessions have a purpose and that there are specific objectives that will be met during the training. Consider that you are starting out on a journey across the province. If you have no idea where you're going or where you will occasionally stop, then you will never really know when you get to your destination. The same is true for the behind the wheel lesson. If you try to teach driving skills and decision making to novice drivers without clear objectives or opportunities to do so at specific locations, then you have no idea if you've achieved your goal or not. The lesson plan describes what the novice driver will accomplish during the drive, the behaviors they will demonstrate, and the level of proficiency they will need to achieve to indicate success. The route plan gives the novice multiple opportunities to practice the skills described in the lesson plan with discrete locations where specific behaviors are performed and evaluated. Clearly identified objectives help set the stage for a successful lesson. Objectives are written describing what the learner will accomplish, the conditions they will accomplish the task in, and the level of success they will achieve because of the lesson. There is an old saying that says, "He who fails to plan, plans to fail." The lesson plan leads to the development of appropriate teacher activities, learner activities, and if you have other novice drivers in the vehicle during the lesson, describes what the observer will do while the other novice is driving. Every lesson plan should have a title that gives us a brief description of what the lesson is about. This can also aid in filing for future use with other students or clients. Each lesson should have a list of prerequisites that identify what the novice driver should know or be capable of prior to the start of the lesson. These prerequisites can be descriptive of what a student has learned in a class or a list of skills the driver should have prior to beginning the lesson, or something that they have learned in a previous lesson. Learning goals are what you wish to accomplish by the conclusion of the lesson. Performance objectives are tools an instructor or trainer uses to gauge the progress the novice driver is doing at each stage of the lesson. Performance objectives are usually written in terms of the type of instructional activity, the conditions in which the instruction is given, the expected behavior after the conclusion of the lesson, and the type of assessment or evaluation being used. For example, an objective might be, given instruction in how to perform lane changes, the learner will be able to demonstrate the ability to successfully perform blind spot checks 100% of the time prior to the execution of a lane change. Here is a sample lesson plan with prerequisites, length of lesson, location and type, and the detailed lesson activities. In this lesson, the learner must complete the required pre-work, must have a learner's license with them, and must verify they have received the lesson by signing off on a form. The lesson is 1 hour and there is 1 hour of observation time, and it will cover highway driving and gravel road training. One of the activities in the lesson requires that the new driver do a pre-drive check, indicating the blind spots and the 4 space bubbles around the vehicle. Here are some sample learning goals. By the end of this lesson, the novice driver will be able to demonstrate the ability to maintain an accurate tracking path in all environments, demonstrate the ability to use the concept of tracking and targeting to identify potential and/or actual problems, describe changes in their line of sight and path of travel while driving, demonstrate how to effectively search the driving path they intend the vehicle to occupy, classify a zone as open or closed. Here are some sample performance objectives. This lesson requires that the novice driver demonstrate knowledge and successful in-vehicle performance of specific key behavioral patterns. These include the application of targeting, being able to search the target area and evaluate it, identifying line of sight and path of travel in the front zone as well as the left and right zone, identifying closed front and side zones, applying 3 steps of zone control, and applying speed control options. Other elements of a lesson plan are the teacher activities, novice driver activities, and observer activities. A listing of teacher activities is essential because it gives the instructor reminders of what they are going to do during the drive to achieve the learning goals and objectives stated earlier. Teacher activities might involve such things as introducing the lesson with questions, diagrams, and models, demonstrating the skill that you want the novice driver to perform, and may include questions you might ask at specific locations. The novice driver activities would be directly related to the objectives and what you expect the novice driver to perform. It might include having them complete 5 precision right turns in a specific neighborhood or something similar. If your program or school includes observers during the driving lesson, you would want to list out activities for the observer. These might include worksheets they would fill out during the drive, data they might collect about other drivers and passengers, and questions the instructor-trainer might ask them along the drive. Here are some sample instructor-trainer activities. In this lesson, the in-vehicle instructor will do such things as ask the novice driver to demonstrate required behaviors and patterns of performance on a predetermined route, observe that the performance is satisfactory, coach and cue the novice driver for correct performance and make additional observations, give immediate positive feedback when performance is correct, and provide further explanations using appropriate texts and materials when necessary. And finally, here are some sample novice driver and observer activities. In this lesson, the driver will need to demonstrate certain required behaviors and patterns of performance as well as explain the rationale behind them. The observer will be required to watch correct and incorrect driver performance, give positive feedback when asked to do so, and explain rationale behind various behaviors using appropriate texts and materials when asked. Now let's take a closer look at the route plan. Recall that the behind-the-wheel lesson needs to be purposeful and have multiple opportunities for the novice driver to demonstrate the skills you have identified in the objectives from your lesson plan. The only way to effectively deliver the lesson is to pre-plan your route and then follow it during the lesson. The benefit of a route plan is that it recommends detailed locations to observe and evaluate specific behaviors. It also provides opportunities to repeat behaviors as needed to achieve success and allows for consistency of instruction from one driver to the next. If a school or business has more than one instructor, then the lesson plan and route plan also allows for transfer of instruction from one instructor to the next. It has been mentioned several times before that it is important that a route plan be developed from a lesson plan, combine classroom learning with behind-the-wheel learning, and have specific questions the instructor can ask during the lesson to ensure the objectives are covered. The route plan must be developed in an appropriate driving environment and be consistent with the level of difficulty required by the objectives. For instance, if you are teaching stopping and making precision turns, an appropriate environment would be a residential neighborhood, whereas if you were teaching lane changes, the appropriate environment would be on a 2-lane roadway or one-way streets. The saying that practice makes perfect is not entirely true. It really should be practice makes permanent. Perfect practice makes perfect. Therefore, it is important to give the novice driver multiple opportunities to perform the behavior in the lesson so the instructor can observe, evaluate, and correct the behavior as needed. The drive route should also be simple, but not too simple. Beginning instructors have been known to get lost on their own routes because theirs are too complex or in areas they weren't familiar with. As you become familiar with your lesson plan, specific areas will begin to come to mind where certain skills can be taught and observed. On this slide and the next, you will see an example of a partial route plan. Notice that it has three parts: the drive route, the objectives, and the key behaviors. You can see that these elements are transferred directly from the lesson plan. Look this over and click to the next slide once you're finished. Notice on the left side of the route plan, you can see the questions in the white space. Those are reminders for the instructor to ask questions during the drive. There are also cues as to when the instructor is supposed to give an instruction or command for a certain maneuver. Look this over and click to go to the next slide once you are finished. Recall that if you have others in the vehicle with you during a lesson, remember to maximize their learning by involving them with questions and observations. Otherwise, they will find some very creative ways to utilize their time in the back seat. Here's an example of how unengaged backseat observers have found creative ways to amuse themselves. And you also know that they will most certainly use their mobile device to text or browse the internet, and therefore lose a valuable opportunity to learn if they are not involved. This is why observational activities are so important. Therefore, if you have more than one student or client during a lesson, you can maximize the time in the vehicle by engaging the observer with questions related to the driving conditions and with specific observational activities involving other road users. Just remember that activities should be connected to the lesson, specific to the objectives, noted in your lesson plan and drive route, varied in style, be engaging, and be included in every lesson. Behind the wheel instruction should move from the simple to the complex. For example, an effective instructor would begin their lesson in the parking lot and work their way up to low-volume residential streets, main thoroughfares, dual-lane streets, and then finally to highway and gravel driving. They move the lessons from procedure to process. Anyone who has coached a baseball or hockey team knows that when a player learns a new skill, they do so in a step-by-step or procedural method. The coach gives the directions for each new skill and adds more as the player masters it. Come game time, the coach no longer focuses on the individual skills of the player, but the decision-making and process part of the game. The same is true for driving. When a brand new driver gets into the vehicle, the instructor must coach them in a step-by-step fashion. As they become more proficient, the instructor decreases the coaching and moves to cueing. For risk management purposes, an instructor should have a checklist they go through before they drive. Coming up with a checklist involves answering two basic questions. What are you going to do before the novice driver starts the vehicle? And what is the novice driver going to do before the drive? Prior to every drive, an instructor should check for proper documentation. This would include a license check to ensure the driver has it with them before the lesson starts. Having made this check will help avoid issues should the driver be pulled over by RCMP or local police. You should look at specific areas when you check a license. The first is the expiration date. You want to make sure the license has not expired. The second is to check to see if there are any restrictions on the license, such as needing corrective lenses or needing an extra mirror. Look closely at Area 12. You'll see the number 1. If you look on the back of the license, you'll see that she requires corrective lenses when she drives. Her picture shows that she is not wearing glasses, so you will have to ask her if she has contact lenses in prior to the start of the drive. If she is not wearing them, she is not permitted to drive. Before the novice driver even turns the key, every instructor should do the following. Identify the objectives of the lesson that will be covered. Describe the environment the lesson will take place in. Describe what the expected behaviors are, and connect the current learning with previous learning to continue to build from procedure to process. Each drive should have a pre-drive introduction. Let's watch and listen as this instructor introduces a lesson to a group of novice drivers.
Okay, so I got a question for you guys. Have you ever been driving down the road and, like, for instance, going through Newburgh or some other small town and managed to catch every single one of the lights green?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Right when I see it turn red, I let my foot off the gas and then just slowly coast.
Okay.
To the red
Okay.
light.
And then as you're coasting to it, you check your rear zone, you check to make sure that you don't have to stop too quickly. Okay. But you're timing it. What's an advantage, Laura? What's an advantage to being able to time your lights, arrival to lights, for green? What do you think?
If you can time them well, you can see just how much of the brake you need to use or how much of the accelerator you have to use.
Okay, that's part of it. What happens when we stop? What happens to stuff behind us?
It gets closer.
Yeah, and if we can control our rear zone by maybe not having to stop quite as much, then it makes it safer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we don't want to rear end people while we're driving, do we? Or we don't want people to rear end us while we're driving down the roadway. So our whole goal then is to time the arrival to green. That's what we want to try and do. And then when we get to the intersection, we want to search the left, the front, and the right before we actually go through it, because who knows if there's a high-speed chase or someone hasn't seen the red light or something of that nature. Okay?
Yep.
So today we're going to try timing arrival to green.
Props or diagrams should be used when introducing the lesson to appeal to a variety of learners. Here are some creative examples used to demonstrate a concept prior to the start of a drive. Some instructors also use dry erase pens on the window to show reference points, which, if very small, can be left on for the duration of the lesson or until they are able to remember them on their own. During the lesson, it is extremely important that the instructor maintain a sense of alertness and readiness. Your main role is to manage risk during the behind-the-wheel lesson. Therefore, you need to be alert at all times to the risks and hazards that the driver will encounter, or you may encounter some difficulties that could lead to a crash. As the instructor, you must be the risk manager in the vehicle. There are times you must be prepared to intervene in a lesson, but you can only do so if you have a relaxed position of alertness. This means you need to look forward, keep your eyes on the novice driver, see what the novice driver is doing with their eyes and with their head checks. You need to use your rearview mirror to see what is going on behind you, and you need to make sure all safety belts and head restraints are adjusted properly. As the risk manager in the vehicle, you need to be aware of everything that is going on around you. This is called situational awareness. Your left hand should be free of any objects, so you have immediate access to provide assistance in steering should the need arise. If you have a coffee cup, pen, or clipboard in your left hand, you may waste valuable seconds reaching the wheel and thus result in a crash. Although it is nice to have coffee or tea in the morning, it is not a good idea during a lesson. Have your coffee during your breaks between drivers. The cell phone is a great invention, but causes 3 types of distractions, even for the instructor who is not driving the vehicle. The first is a visual distraction. Notice that the instructor is not looking where they need to look to ensure the safety around the vehicle. The second distraction is cognitive distraction. Even though he might be able to see a hazard, doesn't necessarily mean that it registers with him because he is thinking about the phone conversation rather than the driving task. The third is mechanical distraction. He has one hand tied up by holding the phone and therefore is not fully capable of providing assistance should the need arise. Some instructors have given behind-the-wheel instruction a bad name because they are more interested in something other than teaching. This instructor cannot be aware of what the driver needs to do or what the environmental conditions might be, and therefore increases the risk to both the driver and himself. There are several things not okay with this instructor. The first is his eyes are off the driver and off the environment and on his route sheet instead. The second is that he has something in his left hand. The third is that he does not have his safety belt on. Here, the instructor is alert to what is going on, checking to make sure the driver is situated correctly for the drive. He has nothing in his hands, and his full attention is given to the novice driver and the driving environment. Another thing you need to make sure you do is have your foot positioned near the instructor brake, in case you need to use it because the novice driver didn't see a stop sign or a red light. You are the coach, teacher, and risk manager during a behind-the-wheel lesson. You need an eye for detail so that you can make accurate observation of the novice driver's head, eyes, hand position, steering technique, and their feet. You also need to make accurate observations of the vehicle path and position, instructor reference points and transition pegs, other road users and what they are doing, and the roadway environment. You are in essence looking ahead 10 to 15 seconds of where the novice driver is looking, so you can coach and correct before their actions become critical. Giving directions in a correct manner will greatly increase the effectiveness of the lesson. First things first. Give the location first and then the action. For instance, at the next intersection, turn left. If we tell the driver to turn left and then mention the street, they may turn immediately at your command into a driveway, alleyway, or parking space. In order to avoid this, get their attention with enough time for them to comprehend that something is going to happen. Then state it in a short, concise command. At the next intersection, turn left. Use these tips when giving a novice driver directions to avoid potential issues. Use short, concise commands because driving instructions stated as a request can be ignored and a driver can choose to do something differently. Make sure your commands are easy to state for you and easy to remember for the novice driver. Ensure each command is clearly understandable and easy to follow and given loudly and early enough for the driver to hear and respond to. There should be enough time from the command to the time they need to execute the maneuver so the driver can ask you to repeat or clarify if needed. The directions should be given so as not to overload the driver with too many things to do in too short of a time span. Remember, giving directions in the same way, same style, with similar content, and for every driver will ensure consistency in your delivery. Since we won't be driving with these novice drivers for the rest of their lives, it is imperative that we help them become problem solvers through an active questioning strategy. This is the beginning stages of commentary driving. If instructors only tell drivers what they should do, new drivers will be ill-equipped to handle the challenges they are going to face. Asking questions to both the driver and observer helps them think through situations and arrive at answers that will help them deal with issues they are going to encounter their entire driving life. It also helps the instructor know their level of understanding and moves the driving process from a step-by-step procedure to an integrated decision-making process. Evaluation feedback is imperative for every lesson. The first step in the process is to select what you want to evaluate and then either ask questions, observe the driver's performance, or both. Once the driver has responded or completed the maneuver, evaluate the behavioral patterns based on the objective you chose at the beginning of the lesson. If they performed the task adequately or answered the question properly, respond with specific positive feedback. The list of statements in the blue box give you some suggestions. For instance, you might say, "I like the way you stopped at the correct stop location using your reference points," or "That was a great left turn because you did a nice job of accelerating a transition peg." Once the feedback has been given, repeat the process over and over during the drive. If the behavior is not okay, then the instructor gives a cue to the desired outcome. For instance, if they stop beyond the legal stop line, the instructor coach would cue them with something like, "Remember the reference point for the forward position?" If they perform the behavior correctly using their reference point for the forward position, provide appropriate feedback and go on to the next behavior to be evaluated. If they still don't succeed, then have them repeat the behavior, coaching them step by step until they do it correctly. As they get more proficient, move to cueing for the correct behaviors, giving feedback, and for directions. Evaluation must be ongoing throughout the entire lesson and directly connected to the lesson objectives. If you have designed your drive route well, you will spread the opportunities to observe driver behaviors over the entire behind the wheel session. After each drive, it is important to let the novice driver debrief. Self-assessment or evaluation lets the driver review their drive and identify where they were successful and what they need to work on. Once the driver has identified strengths and weaknesses, the instructor can reinforce the positives and take the next steps to prescribe solutions for improvement in areas the novice driver was not successful. It is always important to begin with a positive so that when you have to move to areas they need improvement in, the novice driver won't be on the defensive. Be very specific about what you want the driver to work on. Explain what the driver will be doing at the next lesson and remember to finish the entire debrief with a positive. Let's watch and listen as this instructor debriefs the lesson with a novice driver.
So how do you think you did?
Pretty good.
Okay. What was positive about your ride?
That I accelerated smoothly, brake, looked all around.
Your transition to gas and brake was very good. You did a nice job of accelerating smoothly, stopping smoothly. There was no jerking or anything like that. That's keeping the vehicle in balance. It's a really good thing to have. Timing your arrival to green on lights, how'd you do?
Pretty good.
Yeah, you did. You got. I thought it was very good. And over here on Hall Boulevard, you saw the alert switch went on. You saw the light way out in the front there, and you go, slow down here. And so all you did was take the foot off the gas, didn't you?
Yeah.
Didn't even need to brake, did you? All right. And then look at what happened. Now, unfortunately, too many people in America, they like to accelerate to the light and brake as hard as they can. Okay? That's hard on the cars, it's hard on the brakes, and it's especially hard on your driver ed teacher. Okay? You did a nice job, though, of getting us accelerated to the point. You did a nice job of adjusting your lane position when we came across those pedestrians. We don't want to run into them. You did a good job adjusting your lane position. And you did a nice job of checking your rear zone and keeping a safe following distance. Good job.
Thanks.
Great.
Here's a list of some possible acceptable criteria for evaluating driver performance. Consider the clip you saw on the last slide. Remember, the instructor told the novice driver he did a good job of decreasing his risk by searching and adjusting his speed. The instructor also told the driver what he saw about their behavior and how they were obeying traffic laws and reducing risk. Here are some actual unacceptable evaluation criteria shared by beginning instructors after a lesson. Imagine using these criteria for evaluating performance. None of them convey the message of using specific feedback related directly to the objectives of a lesson plan. Just because you feel comfortable or frightened, or the driver does what you tell them to, does not mean their performance is adequate. Also, you should not compare drivers. Instead, focus on the behaviors and how they connect to what you want them to learn. Every driver needs feedback to know when they have or have not performed the task correctly. If an instructor ignores good behavior or delays providing positive feedback, the novice driver will not be aware of what they did well or why they were successful. The powerful nature of positive reinforcement helps the novice driver retain and grow correct behaviors. It is most effective when the instructor identifies specific correct behaviors rather than make general statements like, "That was a good turn," or "Nice stop." Rather, the effective coach would say something like, "That was a great turn because you used your target to complete the turn." "That was a nice stop because you slightly released the brake pressure to prevent the vehicle from pitching forward." The last piece is that your positive reinforcement must be genuine and sincere. We are in the business of coaching and encouraging new drivers to become successful drivers, and one of the ways that we do that is with positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement means that you are praising the driver after they perform a maneuver correctly. It is used to strengthen the likelihood that they will perform the behavior in the same way again. This can be particularly powerful when you are trying to bring about an attitude change, such as in a driver who is speeding deliberately. Positive reinforcement can also be used by rewarding the driver. For example, you might tell them that if they are able to make a complete stop 5 times, they will get to plan the route for the next lesson. However, you must tie it to something that is meaningful for them. The behind-the-wheel lesson should be spread out over several weeks to allow for the transfer of learning. It's important for the novice driver to practice the skills they have covered between each lesson. It is not easy learning a complex task in a short amount of time that we have with them. At the conclusion of each drive, it is also important to document what you covered, how well the novice driver did during the lesson, and what they need to work on before their next drive with you. If you are working with young drivers, this also serves as a good communication tool between you and their parents, so they know what to work on with their son or daughter before their next driving lesson. In conclusion, after completing this module, you should understand the key elements of an effective behind-the-wheel lesson, the essential elements of a lesson plan including how to set objectives, how to build an effective drive route and apply it to your lessons, be able to explain the coaching and instruction sequence of a lesson, and be able to list the criteria used to evaluate drivers during a lesson. Don't forget to finish the quiz questions on the behind the wheel quiz sheet and email it to the Driver Education Office.